All right, all right. Welcome to the podcast. Today we have a treat. It's someone that has a powerful story and has done powerful things. So I am very honored and it's a pleasure. Richard, can you please tell the world who you are?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on your show. So I guess my name is Richard Hsung. I have a middle name Perkins, which represents, I guess, comes from my American side of heritage. I retired about 2 years ago from after having taught chemistry for better part of 3 decades, and in part also because I wanted to focus my attention on completing my mother's memoir. She was unable to finish before she passed away.
So yeah, great. I love that you went into that. So you finished a memoir for her. Is that
Yes, she spent about 11, 12 years on her memoir. Uh, I guess from 1980s to about early 1990s. And then I
wow.
took over in 2014, and I spent about just short of 10 years.
Wow, so tell us about that. I have a lot of questions, especially about chemistry, because and you have a PhD, correct? That I read you have a PhD.
Yes,
Okay.
I went to graduate school at University of Chicago. I got a PhD in, I guess, organic chemistry, and I taught at the University of Minnesota for about 10 years before moving to University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I guess again, depends on how I count. So maybe about 16 or 17 years at Madison. So almost 30 years of teaching chemistry and also researching chemistry. Right.
So in other words, you're smart. Let's get that out the way.
Uh, yeah, I guess people have different definitions of being smart, right? So I don't always believe having more education implies that. But yes,
Got it, got it.
like you yourself, and we have a PhD in something.
That's good something. We're good at something. Got it.
That's
So
right.
tell me about the memoir, or do you want to tell me about your mom first and then get into the memoir?
Yes, I think two are perhaps related. So my mother was born in 1931, and she was shortly after her birth, she was adopted by American medical missionaries who were working in China at the time and helping out Chinese people. And then my mother was essentially surrounded by Westerners and all sorts of American influences and viewed herself as American. English was her first language. And during World War II, she spent some time in the States because Japan occupied China and Japan America war. And so she lived in Yonkers, New York. And then towards,
Yonkers.
yeah,
Yonkers
so
is
and she actually enrolled in junior high school in Yonkers. And then about mid 1940s, they returned. She and her American parents, or my American grandparents, they returned to China because my American grandparents want to continue their medical missions. And then, of course, a few years later, communists swept through the country and took over. And then my American grandparents came back to the States while my mother was trapped in China for about 30 years. In
oh wait.
1980, my mother was able to return to
So
to America
they
and brought me over. Mhm.
so she couldn't leave when they left. She couldn't leave with them.
Yes, so that would be one of the stories in her memoir. So it was during the height of Korean conflict in 1950, and then so anti-American fervor was at an all-time high, and so her parents were driven out of China, or they had to flee instantly. And my mother was a freshman in an English-speaking college about 300 miles away. She couldn't make it back. Yeah.
Oh
So
my
she was left behind.
goodness. That's an issue, right?
Yep. Right, right.
Wow,
Yeah.
your mom sounds like a really, really tough person. Well, like a person that's been able to go through so much. Was that her personality? Was she that type of
Yes, she became tougher. Uh, I guess helping her to complete this memoir, I realized, what I saw as I was growing up was just one side of her. And then when she was perhaps as a teenager or at my age, when a young age, she was just like the rest of us. Right? She was scared. She
Wow.
wasn't sure. She was trapped in China. Her understanding of the culture and language were very poor. And so she was essentially a foreigner in her own country, in her own birth country. She looked Chinese, but she couldn't speak very well. And so she had to work with all of that. But she became courageous and brave. But to be fair, she had a lot of people helping her out along the way. So the memoir is really to dedicate and remembering all these extraordinary people that she had
No.
the fortune of encountering, starting from her own adopted American parents. I guess. Yeah.
Oh, so it kind of shows how. Oh, I like that. It shows how strong, how powerful support is for people.
I mean, we make it because we have our own determinations, but we make it because we have all these people coming out of woodwork helping us all along the way, right?
Yes.
Right.
And without it, it's impossible. So, I mean, what is making you finish the memoir? Like, why? Because I've written, and it is one of the hardest. It really is hard to sit down and do, right. It's difficult, and it takes time. So why that? Why did you want to do that for her?
Well, to be honest, if I know what I know now, if I knew what I know now, I wouldn't do it.
Really?
Yeah. So I guess I made a promise and a naive one. My mother was dying in a nursing home. She died of Alzheimer's. And I was asked talking to her, even though the conversation was just one sided. It was a monologue. And then I said, you should just go and be at peace, be free on the other side, wherever that side is.
Yeah.
And then later on, I realized during that monologue, I said that maybe you're worried about who is going to finish your memoir for you. I said, well, how about I'll do it, and then you can leave here, rest assured that will be finished. And then I think she heard me, right? So she died a couple months later.
Look at
So then, then that was when I realized, oh my goodness, what did I just promise?
but you got to do it. That's mom. You
Yeah,
promised.
so my father handed me 3 boxes of her unfinished manuscript, 1,000 pages.
How big is the book? How?
So ultimately, the memoir ended up to be 3 volumes, like a trilogy, which is bizarre. It wasn't by design, but it just turned out to be that way. And uh, I'm very grateful that I had fantastic editors and publishers who helped me along the way to
Yeah.
parcel them into 3 volumes. Although all the stories are contiguous, chronologically ordered, but each can stand on its own, represent 3 distinctly different periods in the 20th century. So the memoir is also about history. And so, yeah.
Yeah, just here sitting while you were telling me some of the background, it's a history lesson at the same time. There's a lot of history to learn from it.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what's the name of the book? Let's put that out there immediately.
Okay, so the books the title is Spring Flower, and it is really a literally a translation of my mother's Chinese name. Her biological parents were dirt poor farmers when she was born. They didn't know how what to name her. In China, they name girls after a certain type of flowers, I guess.
Ah,
And
that
so
was the
they
thing.
named her Spring Flower, and so my editor thought that would be an interesting, title.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It
So
sounds
Spring
beautiful. And
Flower
mhm.
with 3 different subtitles for 3 volumes.
3 volumes. So you had to go. Oh man, I cannot imagine. So you had to go through this information, disseminate it, and put it. That's
Yes,
good for
it
you.
was extremely painful towards the end, exhaustive and exhausting. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, yeah.
That's not what they say, but it was more than that, right?
Yeah, again, like what I said, if I knew what I know now, I would have a promise that B do it.
Well, I'm glad you did because I mean it's a I mean it's a powerful story. Did you learn anything about your mom that we already spoke that you saw how many people were around her? Did you learn something about her that you didn't know before looking at this?
Well, there were many things, and I was
Mhm.
alluding to earlier that she came across to me as this person who smart and brave and courageous and hardened. Also, very difficult for her to show her emotions
I imagine.
or her emotional sides,
Mhm.
and but then writing, working on her memoir again, she was human. She had all these struggles and she was weak at times, and a lot of times her inner resources will be wearing thin. And then again, it's all suddenly will be there will be these people coming out of nowhere. I guess they're angels in disguise, if you will, and helping
Mhm.
her out. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to uh, know her human side, I guess,
Yeah.
for lack of a better phrase. Yeah. Mhm.
So what the person you knew was a tough parent, like
Yeah, right.
you
And
noticed.
she held me
Well,
to the highest, most
mm,
loftiest expectations, unreasonable expectations all my life. And so in many ways, I feared her. And we didn't have that close a relationship because she was this authoritarian figure to me, right?
eh,
And then after working on her memoirs, she was this human being. And, she loved the people, people loved her, and so on, right?
so you got to see all of that through the memoir. So fear. So do you think she was when you said you had kind of a fear with her because she was strict and she held you to these standards? Do you think it came from what she went through? Like she was trying to. But what do you? Why do
Yes,
you?
so here's a story. At one point, I think it was shortly before we came to America, I came to the States, and I was joking with my father. I said, "Oh, my mother." I was trying to, I guess, kissing up to my mother. I said,
Mhm.
"Oh, my mother is one of the most wonderful human being, warm and kind." And my father just stopped me cold right there and said, "Nope, your mother, your mother used to be a warm human being. So she changed over those 30 years trapped in China. Yeah. Partly,
Imagine.
partly for survival. Right? So
Of course, yeah, and she was like you said, she was her mindset was she's an American, she the language, the culture for, and she got stuck there.
yeah.
I couldn't see it happen. I asked the question, because my parents are from Dominican Republic,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of news with this stuff, and I always think, what would it be to just get dropped off in a country you know nothing, you know no one, scary,
Yes, totally
yeah, and it's
terrifying. I guess.
and especially with the state of the country, what was going
Yeah.
on there. It's
They went through multiple movements, revolutions, persecutions.
it's what we what
And even
well
though it's in 1980 we came out legally with our own private personal passports and also visas to enter America, and of course we have American side of our families here, right? So, but technically we were also fleeing, right? She was fleeing,
well,
yeah,
yes.
right,
You see that these are you don't that's another way of seeing it, which is that is what was happening. You were fleeing from that danger.
right.
So how do you feel since when you got here? How do you feel accepted here? How do you feel about living in America, and uh, how do you feel about that?
That's a That's a great question. That feeling changes all the time, but maybe roughly over the past almost half a century, right? 45 some years, I was split in half. The first half, I was this driven person, want to become an all American. Right?
Yeah.
I was a teenager. I was 14 years old. I turned 15 once we landed in New York, and then to the point where I forgot to speak Chinese. I forgot most about Chinese culture and
Oh,
history myself, right?
very good.
Until the last 20 years, especially the last 10 or 11, I had to work on my mother's memoir. And half of that memoir, or more than half, will be about China, right? Its history, its people, the language. I had to travel to China many times, try to re engage Chinese people, re engage that part of my heritage that I totally ignored for about 2 decades. And so, yeah, so now I don't know who I am. I'm half and half. But when they say you're half and half, that sometimes implies you have nothing. You're bilingual, well, meaning that you're not really good at either language.
And I'm
You know what I mean? I don't know. So I'm a little bit confused after finishing my mom's memoir. It's like, okay, now I need to refigure out who I am. Yeah. So
so that the memoir did that to you. It made you now want to go more and discover more about yourself.
yes, I
Oh,
think that's why sometimes people ask me what I gain most from working on this memoir. I will use the word redemptive. I found out who I was, what I had been, and so now I'm trying to figure out to try to use this as a platform
of
to
course.
figure out who I really am. And maybe that will take next 20 years or so, which will be pretty much it, right? So how many 20 years
Definitely.
does a person have?
Well, you're gonna get the other half. This is how you're gonna
That's
get the other
right.
half. This is how you get it. It's are there any stories that I know you don't want to put everything out there about the book? Are there any stories that really caught your attention when you were working on this memoir from mom?
Uh, yes, I guess uh, some of the stories that she was only able to work partway through or then couldn't finish were about 1960s and 70s, and I had to interview a lot of people, including my own father, because I was pretty sketchy about that part of history. I was very young, even though I remember a few stories. And so once Chairman Mao has this very famous, infamous, what
Infamous, yeah, that's what.
yeah, Cultural Revolution, which
Yeah.
I was born at the onset of it. And so my father went to Stalin's gulag right away. He was being persecuted because he had to criticize the government 10 years earlier for their economic policies and various developmental policies. And my mother, of course, had this religious American background, right? And also lived in America. And so she was at the top of the persecution list. And so, but yet she became a physician. She was an ophthalmologist. So that saved her because I don't care what revolution one is undertaking. Everyone needs a competent doctor. Everyone still needs
Everyone.
healthcare, right? So they actually allowed her to continue working in a hospital, and they need to have a hospital remaining open and functional. And so, but she was constantly away, being reformed, re-educated, and going through these rustication programs. So it was my sister. My sister is about 6 years older than me, but she is physically challenged. And so I was this toddler, and she was only 6 years older than me. So we were on our own most of the time. And so it was our neighbors who took care of us.
There
So
goes
that was,
support again. Look
yeah.
at that.
So it's, I remember them very fondly. So there's a significant portion in one of the volumes and essentially dedicated to these wonderful human beings. And they actually, by helping us, they crossed the line, they crossed the ideological line because they weren't the targets of persecution. Right? They were supposedly proletarians, and they're part of a good guys, I guess, right?
Got
And then we
it.
were the bad guys, and we were the anti-revolutionists as kids. But they helped us out.
That is
So those
special,
stories really come across to me.
Well, why do you think they help? Because that's a risk to them. Why do you think they helped you? Well, I know you can't put words in their mouth.
I think ultimately it's the humanity, right? The
Yeah.
humanities in us, right? I think it doesn't really matter what government we're under. To me, all these years, I finally realized there are very few, if any, government ever truly consistently represents the interests of its people,
I
right?
agree. I
So,
agree.
but why we're still here because humanities prevail. History has proven that time again. Why? Well, because there are these people, right? So when I was talking to a lot of people about my mother's memoir, I said the first half sounding kind of like Forrest Gump because she lived this idyllic childhood and she had these opportunities meeting up with all these people, and some of these world leaders, right? And then the second half sounded more like a Schindler's List.
No way.
So all these people coming out of woodwork again, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. So.
So your mom was special, actually. I think. I mean, I don't know. It's what a story. She went through.
People around her made her special, made her life interesting and memorable.
Got it.
Mhm, right.
And oh, so she met world leaders. I saw one of them Gandhi. Is that what I see there?
Yeah. So they were trying to go back to China after war was over in 1945. Literally, she was on a battleship en route to Africa on VE Day. But the Pacific Theater, Japan hadn't surrendered yet. And so they were thinking about entering China from Burma, the western border. But by the time they reached India, the American missionaries in India said, well, don't go back there. They're still at war. So why don't you stay in India for a while? So that's how my American grandparents did their missionary work for about a year in India. My mother attended a boarding school in the Himalayas. And during that time, they were in Mumbai. Sometime they saw Gandhi.
Okay, that must have been amazing.
Yeah, Gandhi
Who,
was on one of his hunger strikes. Yeah.
who else did she get to meet as world leaders?
I guess Eleanor Roosevelt on a Pullman train coming back from Albany to Yonkers, New York.
What a life!
And then at the time, Chinese government at the time is called Republic Nationalist. Now is the government for Taiwan. The president at that time was actually part of Allies, right, during the wartime. And that president, Chiang Kai-shek is the name, and I actually met my mom and knew my American grandparents really well. And one of those days in late 1940s, he personally asked my grandfather, who was not only a surgeon but also an ordained pastor, to actually preach at one of the Methodist church. So it's very interesting. She had all those opportunities meeting these historical figures. Yeah. Yeah.
I, I find it not strange, but like I don't know the words I'm trying to say, but that she got to do all she went through that she met these people. I think this memoir's for something. I think there's something
Yeah.
in there that's gonna
History, right? So
yeah. She's part of that of the history. Like she's so part of it. Wow, I'm so glad you came. I wanted this is
thank you so much. Yeah, for having me.
a great story. So so your parents were missionaries. What were they like?
Oh, my grandparents. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
sorry, your
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, that's fine. So yeah, so my grandfather, Edward Perkins, was born and raised in Hartford, Connecticut, and from one of the bluest blood New England family you can ever find in terms of wealth, prestige, and power. And then when he was in his 20s, finishing off medical school, he went looking for meaning of life and then decided to become a Christian and then to get his, to become an ordained pastor. And then decided to dedicate his life as a missionary, and he chose China. And so he ended up in this tiny little fishing village along the southern banks of Yangtze River in the Central Valley, China, and directly across from the small town that my mother was born. And so they were there 1916, and my grandmother was actually born and raised in Edinburgh, so she was a Scot. They were migrating to America, and so they were married in 1916, and they went to China and never looked back. And they used their own resources and built a hospital in this tiny little village. And 1931, there was a huge flood. Yangtze River floods all the time, but that was one of the biggest, and actually became, I guess, one of the worst natural disasters in the 20th century, killing about upwards of 4 million people. And
Wait,
so
what?
miraculously, right, my mother lived, and because her biological parents decided to look for someone who would take her because they couldn't afford another mouth to feed, and they found my American grandparents, and then my American grandparents adopted my mom, and they were doing all kinds of fantastic things for Chinese people in dire straits. Yeah.
Wow,
So
that's
they lived an extraordinary life. They, along many other missionaries, American missionaries, and missionaries from Europe, from England, from Australia, really lived an
wow.
extraordinary life. So,
Man, so yeah, there's some special people on this planet that are just like they're here for that to help. I don't know. It's like you said, humanity. It's humanity. I
Yeah,
find humanity beautiful. I know we have a lot of flaws, but
yeah, I know.
we do so much. Look at your grandparents. Look at how many people did they help. I
Yeah.
mean, with you imagine, and then they adopted. Look, you're here. They adopted your mom, and
Yes. Yeah.
is that how much of that rubbed off on you? Because you talk a lot about wonderful people around you, like the support, which is amazing that you talk about that. What rubbed off on you from them?
Not much.
It's, it's,
I I lived my own life. I mean, I recognize they're wonderful, extraordinary. I also can see that I would never be able to fill in their shoes, or even barely following their footsteps. But by completing my mother's memoir, maybe I kind of did my part. Little part. I guess I have played a small role in this whole thing
got it.
by having a memoir out there, remembering these people, by finishing what my
Part.
mother couldn't complete. Right.
Yeah, that's a huge part. So you are following in what they're thinking about, man. Look, these are changing things. Like your family has changed things, which is beautiful, right? This memoir, I'm telling you, is a part of history. I think just the fact that you committed to doing it and you did it, it's, I mean, it says a lot about the type of person you are because, yeah, you committed to her, but she's not here any longer. You know, when the time gets tough, you could have always said, you know what, I'm not going to do it. But you did it. Did you feel like that was a purpose while you were doing it? Or,
Yeah. So foremost, thank you for complimenting me. I appreciate
of
that.
course, of course.
Yeah, there were numerous moments where I would have just quit. Right. So, because it got very exhausting mentally and physically, and also emotionally, because I had to relive some of the painful
Yeah.
memories and stories of my childhood because that would be part of it. My mother decided the memoir would end about 1980 when she and I landed in JFK from China, and so that's fine. But there was still that first
Yeah.
14 years of my life was part of the story, right? So that was very difficult for me too, and I
Oh,
understood why she stopped writing because it was very difficult for her, and.
oh,
And now I look back upon early 1990s. She suffered from deep depression, which led to her early dementia in part, I guess. And so I understood why that would be. And so yeah, so it was very difficult, like what you alluded to. I wanted to quit many times, but with a lot of help of wonderful people that surrounded me over the
yep.
past decade or so, I was able to pull through. I guess. Yeah. Now I look back on this whole experience. I found it redemptive. I didn't always think this way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how long did it take you to finish your part of it? I know you mentioned it, but
Uh, yeah, about 10 years. Yeah, 9 years. I guess. To be fair, though, first few years was totally immersed in what she had already written, and also traveling to look for people who knew stories, lived through 1950s, 60s, 70s in China, and then and come together and filling all the gaps, right? So maybe my part took about 2 or 3 years.
got it. How this I'm going this must be an amazing an amazing book. I'm excited. I'm definitely gonna read it. Can you tell us anything about those 14 years of you when you were in China? Anything that you can?
Yeah, I guess I understood much more by working on this memoir, by listening to people's stories, incorporate some of their stories into the memoir to fill the gap again. And I even interviewed my own father, and I realized, some of my recollections that I was very brave and I was this person, man of the house, taking care of my sister when my mother was being whisked away for reform, and my father was still at the labor camp in jail. And so, but actually,
Wait, wait, wait.
based on my mother, I was weak, B is not streetwise. C was constantly creating problems for her. And then
Like,
so it was very true that those neighbors, not just the ones that directly next to our tiny little apartment that we all squeezed in, and with other neighbors. So we lived in this compound. Technically, it was just for one family, a pretty well-off family, maybe in the early part of 19th,
mhm.
20th century. But the 26 families live in that compound, and I call it the slum, essentially. And then we
This
all
love.
shared a single bathroom, right? 26
No
family
way.
and a couple of
26.
stalls for cooking, and but yet somehow people bonded together,
Hmm.
and that was how my sister and I pulled through. And there's sort of just numerous, countless sort of anecdotes about that period. And again, that's also part of history, part of Chinese history,
Yes.
for which I definitely believe my mother will think that way, and I do too. I hope China will never repeat that again.
Oh, man, sir, like, so you, the way you said everything you went through, I was taking care of you just glossed over it like it wasn't a big deal. That's pretty powerful. So you were in that mix. You were part of this situation. Like, I don't know. I think you were courageous, very courageous, right? Because, and look at who you are, who you've become now. You have a PhD. You could have used all those situations as an excuse. I think it's amazing. Are you proud of the fact that you went through that, got out of it, you finished your mom's book, and you did good for your career?
Yes, I'm incredibly grateful
Great.
because to
Wow.
endure through a childhood like that, things could
Mhm.
go either way. Right? And I happen to pick a direction which is not too bad,
It's
and
great.
I'm incredibly grateful. I had a chance to teach chemistry for almost 30 years, and working with some of the most wonderful students from all over the place in all over the world. And so I'm very happy. Very again, the word is grateful, I guess, to have the
Gracious.
opportunity. But it could have gone the other direction, right? And
Very fun.
so because sometimes I look at kids in inner cities, impoverished places in America, and that's what happens, right? And things could also go two different directions, and many of them don't have the same kind of opportunities, and then they pick the wrong side. So yeah, and so in that sense, yes, and I think coming out to America probably helped that,
Of
at
course.
least for me. Mhm. Right?
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. It could have completely gone the other way. That's a lot of trauma. That's a traumatic event, to be honest with you. That's something that I grew up in one of those impoverished neighborhoods here in New York, but I couldn't imagine going through what you went through. Your family was constantly being torn apart, and it was
Right.
survival. You guys are just surviving against the government. That's
Right. But
wild.
in ways not too dissimilar, right? So
Got it.
yeah,
Got it.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You're
Yeah,
completely right.
there are so many similarities between what you just said and what I just said when going through as a kid. Yeah.
It's hard. And you making that choice. What do you think is the most important skill? It, we're talking about bad things that happen and barriers, right? What is the most important skill for someone to have if they're living in a situation not as extreme as yours, but where they're trying to get out of it like you did and trying to earn their degrees or have a good career? What do you think they should start working with themselves on to get there?
I guess I'll steal a word from my mother, and she never lost hope,
Oh,
and so I think all through her life, and especially now having worked on her memoir, I understood, right. She has a sort of childlike conviction, and I guess the word is ingenuous, right? Naive, maybe, perhaps. And it doesn't matter. It didn't matter what she was going through, and she held on to that hope. And in
oh,
part, again, there were all these people again helping her out at the right time, the right moment, and and also she constantly held America, this image of America,
Mm,
perhaps idealized the image of America, which would be based on her images of her parents, adopted American parents.
of
She
course.
held that very close to her heart, and all of those elements helped her getting through those 3 decades trapped in China. And again, her so for me, yes, I after living through those 15 years in China, and then having come to America, I had to start a new set of struggles on my own because I didn't know English well enough,
Yeah.
and going to school. And so I too, right? So I think looking back on that, I too had a lot of people helping me out, wonderful human beings helping me out. But also for myself, I kept on hoping that eventually I'll make it.
Yeah, I hope, believe. Yes, it's a very powerful word, and yeah, it is. So, what are you doing now? I know you did the book. What's your profession again? I wanted to ask some questions about that, if possible.
So I after the last volume came out about now maybe 2 years, a little less 2 years ago, I did nothing for about a year.
You were done. You were tired.
That's right. I was totally exhausted, and
You
so
were tired.
yeah. So now this past year started with the early last year. I've been on this sort of campaign trail, I guess, promotion trail, promoting my mother's memoir. And during this process, I realized, no, I don't want to write another memoir. I don't
I
know
wonder why.
a 3 volume memoir, but I don't mind to write short stories. 1,000 word, 500 word, 800 word short stories, essays. And so I've been doing that, and I realized I really enjoy writing. And
Look
so
at that.
it's not going to be a profession or a paid profession, but it will just be something that will keep me busy and sharp and aware. Yeah.
I think that's amazing. Look, mom is still showing you some stuff about yourself, huh?
Yes, I hate that, but it's true.
Like, mom, just stop.
Yes, enough already.
I love your personality, man. I love how positive you are. I don't know. It's great. It's very refreshing. So yeah, mom is still she's still active in your life. She's still giving you what you need because look, you found another passion
Yes,
because of what you were doing for her.
yes, I'm appreciative. Yep, of that.
Yeah. So if someone's writing a memoir, let's think about that. There's someone, not a memoir, any book. They want to sit down and start writing. It's hard for people, right, to sit down and write. What advice can you give them?
Okay, so here we go. So having taught chemistry for 30 years, I've trained many students and postdoc work with them, and I learned from my own mentor about how to begin a career as a graduate student and then conducting research work and so on. And you read a topic and you read a subject and you talk to people who've done it before. And if you still don't understand, come back and talk to me. Go to a library and learn more. And then before you just go right into a lab and start doing things. So with all that in mind, my mother, neither my mother nor I did any of that. We all jumped right into writing a book. So that would be something I would say, please don't do that. And my mother
Yeah.
never talked to anyone who had written any kind of books, let alone memoir, especially my American side of family. Many of them are actually quite established authors. And so it would be very easy for her to say, hey, how do you write a memoir? No, she didn't do that, and I didn't do that. And that's why it took about 25 years to finish this thing. And then, so the trouble we ran into was that we didn't know how many words we needed to make a good book. And she says something like, back in early 1980s, so occasionally I ask her and we'll talk to her and help her a little bit. She said, oh, you need a million words to make a good book.
A million
Million
words?
words. Oh, okay. So that sort of stuck in my mind. And it didn't occur to me in the days of internet age, right when I began working on her memoir, to actually search and ask or search, right? And so it was about 600,000 words. I realized, what are we doing? And how many books are a million words? Right? This is a lot. and I realized that the King James Bible is only 700,000. And then the Old Testament we're about to pass the Old Testament. And then there are many very well-known books over 100,000 words. But our last name is not Dickens, right? Or
Yeah.
Tolstoy. So we're just an ordinary human being. Why would you write a million words about an ordinary human
Never
being?
heard of that. I never heard
I know.
someone write that
So that
much.
was such a terrible exercise that my mother and I undertook. And so, yeah, so definitely talk to people who have written books. And actually, 50,000 words will make a great book. Right. So I will
Oh
never
my
have
God,
done
your
this.
humor is amazing. Your humor is amazing. I love the way you explain it. So, how would you do it? Would you do it like every night? Would you sit down and write a how do you write so much? I don't know. It's like,
Yeah. So there are days you just keep on writing. And then there'll be days and weeks and months you just hit this mental block or
yeah.
mental paralysis. You simply can't write. I couldn't write a single word. Uh, and then that's also right when a person writes a memoir, everyone's life is book worthy, but not everyone wants to sit down and dredge up the past,
That's right.
because the past can be painful. And so really look out that aspect of writing a memoir is the emotional side of the price you have to pay,
Yeah.
and
I like
the mental health issue
yeah.
you have to be aware of. Yeah, so I think those are all things I learned along the way. Learned the hard way without actually again talking to people first and see what this process
You skip a step.
That's right.
So, and I like that you mentioned the mental health. I was, as you were speaking, I was writing down. How did you deal with looking at that stuff again? Like, how were you able to? You came out of the other side great. How are you able to do that?
I had help, and
Mhm.
I think I got very sick in back in 2018, 19. So sick that obviously, right, I definitely need help and I need prescriptions. And so, but yet I was aware of the fact that I needed help, and that's not something that everyone can say. So I'm again lucky to be aware of that. That this was writing my mother, completing my mother's memoir, was killing me, and I was aware of the fact that I didn't want to die for any book. I
Yeah, that is.
don't want to
You
die
don't
for
want
books.
to.
I don't want to die for any books, right? And so I called up a therapist I had worked with 20 years earlier, and she was
Wow.
still practicing, and she was just really shocked because my first line was like, 20 years ago, I walked into your office, I didn't really care, right? Die or living or dying, or I lived or died. But now, actually, I'm calling you because I want to live so I can finish my mother's memoir.
Oh,
And so, yeah, so she took me in and she worked with me along the way with, again, wonderful editors and publishers. And so they were essentially my crutches. And then I also had a lot of help. Finally, I reached out to my American side of family who were, again, established authors, written many books, to have their help. And so a lot of people helped along, and for this last sort of a stretch, home stretch, so to speak. Yeah.
support, man. If people underestimate the power of support, it's it's what
Completely well put. I couldn't say it better. The
powerful.
power of support.
Do you want to share? What do you think is the meaning of life, or no?
Of life, yeah, maybe it just off the cuff kind of answer, right? Um, I guess it's a day by day, right?
Day by
It's
day.
very hard to find meaning of life by sitting here and thinking about what do I want to do, how big and how huge and how fantastic it can be. But it's really the little things that add up. Interacting with people you could help, or people can help you, and people you can teach, or people can you can learn from, and cumulatively, it becomes meaning of life, right? So I think it's often when we look back on our life, we suddenly realize the meaning of our individual lives.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah.
I'm glad I asked. That was really good. Thank you. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you for
What-
asking.
That was beautiful. Why do you think writing for your mom, why do you think it was so important to her for this memoir? Or like, why do you, I know you can't be in her shoes, but why do you think she started a long time ago? Why do you think it was so important?
Yeah, it was shortly after we arrived in America and settled down in Boston. That's where I actually grew up. And so, again, her American side of family says, "Oh, you gotta. These are very interesting stories. You gotta write it down. You have to honor your American parents." And then there are a lot of people. She was sometimes at a conference or at a gathering would say, "Oh my goodness, you have very interesting past. You should write it." And then so she would be like, "Why bother, right? It's like I'm an ordinary human being.
Yeah, like,
Why sit down and judging on the past and write a story about myself? Who will read? Who will read them, right? Who will read it?" And so, but later on again, the impetus was she realized being an ordinary human being, she encountered many unordinary events in history, and but of course she's very poor in history, and so she didn't want to make. She's not even an amateur in history, so she didn't want to talk about history, and she just want to make sure that his historical backgrounds are just percolating
yeah,
in the background. She wanted to just talk about people she had the honor of meeting. And so again, what drove her to write it, and ultimately what drove me to complete it, is to make sure these people are being remembered somewhere.
yo,
So, uh,
that's powerful. I love it. I love it. I love it. What a legacy. Do you see? It's a legacy. It came from
yes,
mom to you, and I think it's a beautiful, just the story of you writing and finishing it and what you went through, and that just in that, it's a beautiful story.
yes, it is a legacy. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is leaving it behind. I'm gonna get the book because I have to read this. This is when you were coming on. I always sit down. I look a little bit to know
Sure.
who I'm talking to. I was like, what? This is amazing. It's an amazing story. I love history, so it's a great way to read into history while having an entertaining value of this person's perspective while going through this history. It's beautiful. How about a documentary? When are you making that? Really?
Yeah, that will be interesting.
That would be,
I will work on that.
it would do good. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it would do really good. Well, I am very, very happy that you sat across from me today. I'm very proud of what you've done for your mom. As a son, I'm very like, you did the real good son thing, like you're following that vision she had and you put it out into the world. I think, please, everyone, support. Get the book. It is important. You want to shout out some of these links again? Your website.
Yes, I recently did publish a website just for the book, and so it'll be Richard Perkins, Perkins, and show my last name, HSUNG.com. Yeah.
Yes, and they'll go in there. They can get the book, right? What formats is it?
So
Paperback.
yeah, so we'll have all the information, but the books are available from Amazon.com or Barnes Noble. So if you type Springflower and then Jim Perkins, my mother's English name, and then it will show up. Yeah.
And and the name of the book is beautiful too. I don't know. I'm gonna go get myself a copy. Everyone should get themselves a copy as well because this is a beautiful story of overcoming challenges, major challenges, things you cannot control, and being able to raise still a great son that's willing to carry on your legacy. I think it's amazing. You guys are amazing, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
I did too. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Okay.
You too.
Repeat after me. I am powerful. I am powerful.